Hi everyone, so a while ago I made a video called 5 books or something that I will never read. I'll probably never read, I think I called it. But that video was about books that I initially thought that I was interested in reading and eventually just realized that I didn't care that much or I wasn't expecting them to be that good anyway. This is sort of a low-hanging fruit version of that. It's basically books that I am not interested in reading and I was never really considering them as part of my TBR anyway. And I'm calling them low-hanging fruit also because they're just genres that I don't tend to read anyway. I like to think that I read all kinds of stuff when it comes to, at least when it comes to fiction. But, you know, there are things that I just don't read that much of or that I don't give as much of a chance often. So these are, you know, picks that are a bit more obvious, and that previous video has more of literary fiction and a couple of different things like that. But in case you think these picks are a bit too obvious for you, I will have timestamps down below so you can skip the different books that I'm gonna talk about. I would say pretty much all of them are fairly obvious, but you know, ever since I started being on BookTube, I remember really watching and seeking out those rant reviews of books that I knew from the beginning that had no chance of being good. And I enjoy them, you know, and sometimes that low-hanging fruit is enjoyable. Now, I know that without reading a book really, you can't give a very good assessment of what it's really like, whether it's good or not, even if you have read reviews. But sometimes reviews have patterns in common, like there's things that people criticize about the books that are the same kind of things that you would criticize about other books or that you tend to have an issue with when it comes to reading. And that's how a lot of us kind of get a good idea of whether to read a book or not, because we might be wasting our time. I think that's one of the points of reviews, really, the fact that you're telling people not to bother with something, but there's also the fact that they are also meant for discussion for people who did read the book. But you know, that's another point. I know that issues are related to this. So let me start with the first really obvious pick. This is the book that everyone loves to hate, and it's 50 Shades. I remember when we used to make fun of Twilight. We were so innocent, we had no idea what was coming to us. And here's the thing, I pretty much always knew that the book was bad, like I never even expected it to be good ever since it became popular and I became aware of it, which was I think around 2013 or 2012. But then I was fairly recently considering reading the book just to make some sort of rant review or something like that, discussing it, you know, looking back at 2011 or something. Considering that, you know, it came out in 2011 and now it is 2021, so it's been 10 years since the first book came out. And I've been watching reviews, summaries, reading summaries, all kinds of different media regarding, you know, criticizing this book or, you know, analyzing it in some way. And it's come to my attention that it's not just a story that's badly written, you know, in terms of quality, in terms of the thing that it proposes, the way that it romanticizes abusive relationships or abusive partners, you know. But from what I've seen from scenes of the movie that, you know, people have in their video reviews or different summaries on Spark Notes or different websites like that, and people's reviews and, you know, such, there is something about this book that actually bothers me more and that I only found out until recently. The book apparently just has this issue with racism. And I'm not talking about the fact that there's only like two characters who aren't white, which is already questionable, right? But I'm referring to something even more specific. I'm referring to something that happens with the character of Jose Rodriguez. So, you know how in Twilight there's Jacob, right? Well, the stand-in for Jacob in this book is called Jose Rodriguez, but he's not the same as Jacob, okay guys, because he's Mexican, he's not a Native American, okay, different character. Apparently there is a scene from a book that was adapted to the movie, to the first movie, where this character is at a party with the main character whose name is Anna, and some other friends, and apparently some of them, at some point, both of them are drunk or buzzed or, you know, tipsy or whatever, and he tries to kiss her. But hear me out, okay? Here's the thing. At that exact moment, Christian, who is the love interest, and of course he's also white, appears on the scene and he saves her, you know, and then takes her to some, I think, a hotel room or somewhere like that. And you know, he makes it his responsibility to get her ready to bed. I think he undresses her and things like, I mean, no. My really big issue with this is that, you know, when Christian, who is white, like I said, he does things constantly to undermine her consent throughout the novel and throughout the series. And we, as readers, you know, are expected to think that that's romantic or it's cute or it's thrilling or whatever. But when Jose does that, or does one thing that undermines her consent, he is constantly punished for it, because even in the second novel he's still apologizing for what he did, which, okay, fair, I mean, it is wrong, right? What he did is wrong. But why is there this double standard between one character and the other? I don't know, and I don't really care actually whether E.L. James made this purposefully to have this message of the Mexican rapist or whatever, but because at the end of it all, it is what she's putting right there. But I'm referring to something that happens in the book. Like, it is very much a Mexican man who undermines her consent, or you could even say tries to rape her, or, you know, take advantage of her state, and she's white, and then she's saved by another white man. And just so I don't get accused of, you know, double standards or letting nostalgia cloud my judgment or something, I know that there is a similar scene in the Twilight series. I think there is Eclipse, where Jacob kisses Bella, you know, suddenly out of nowhere. And, you know, the part when she punches him and everything. And, you know, when I saw that for the first time, you know, I thought it was cute or whatever. I don't know how to justify this, but obviously, you know, you don't necessarily analyze things that with that much depth when you're like 10 or 11. And you might argue that that is also a, you know, racist depiction of Jacob, where he's made out to be like a sort of Indian rapist that, you know, tries to coerce a white woman, and then a white man defends her, even if he's not there in that scene. But really, I mean, actually that is very much questionable, okay? I'm not going to deny that. But what happens in this time, it's a bit more, it's definitely more innocent when Jacob does that. For one, he's a teenager, he isn't drunk, she isn't drunk either. And also, it's not as blatant, because the white love interest doesn't immediately like come and save her, you know? Because it seems like E.L. James just took a page from Meyer's book, no pun intended, and made it more racist. And I have my own issues with the later characterization of Jacob on the series, but I will go on that later. And again, what bothers me is just that on E.L. James, Jose was supposed to apologize constantly for things that the love interest would have been immediately justified for, immediately forgiven for by the narration in the story, and therefore the reader was also supposed to, you know, justify it immediately. And I can't reconcile with that. And also, E.L. James just doesn't seem like a great person, to be honest with you. The fact that she has her lawyers cracking down on fanfics of her own work, even though her own work is a fanfiction. I mean, second one is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This book is popular on BookTube, really popular, but it's also one of the most mixed reviewed ones that I've seen on BookTube from the beginning. I definitely remember a lot of people really loving it, praising it, and I also remember that a lot of channels that I followed had really low opinions or sort of ambivalent opinions about it. And from what they say about the story, it seems that it's really very cliched, that it's using a lot of young adult common tropes that I personally don't care to see. The main character apparently seems to be quite the Mary Sue. Just overall, apparently the characters just don't have much of a real personality, which to me is the real flaw that can happen in a story. Like, that's the one thing that you really don't want to happen in your novel. And the other thing is that apparently the main character is supposed to be placed as this sort of anti-hero or like an assassin kind of person, but she never really does anything to deserve that position that is given to her in the story. And I think that's kind of a cop-out always from authors, because they want to make a character seem cool and morally grey, but they don't want him to actually do anything that is too morally questionable, because they don't want to risk having the readers not actually like the character anymore. So a lot of them just kind of say that the character is just really cool and interesting and just kind of expect the reader to take their word for it. So basically I'm just not interested in reading that one. My third one is actually non-fiction. It is The Secret. I don't think I didn't even write down the name of the author on my notes. I just didn't really care, I guess. I'm kind of cheating here because it is a genre that I pretty much never read, and that is self-help. And I'm not gonna say that there's no good self-help out there. I mean, what could I possibly know? But this seems like one of the best examples of why I don't read self-help. So I read some reviews, I watched a couple of videos about this book and about the documentary that was made as a sort of spin-off from it. And its basic premise is that positive thinking leads to positive results. The problem with that is that authors apparently extend this belief to everything, to the point of saying or implying that things like accidents or diseases are also caused by negative thoughts. Which, if that doesn't sound like sheer pseudoscience to you, I mean, I just think it's amazing how people can really convince others that they hold the truth about the universe, and that all of the evidence that contradicts their beliefs and their theories is just so easily dismissed, you know, because someone might say, well, I've, been thinking positively or being optimistic for a while and bad things have happened to me. And then you can easily just say, but no, actually those things happen because you didn't think positively enough. So it becomes this sort of, circular logic where you can just dismiss all evidence against it, and so what's the point, And I think what bothers me the most is that these books are meant for people who want to have answers, who want to find happiness in a sort of simple or easy way, who want to understand what the world is like or improve their lives. But the book itself just gives you this incredibly simplified explanation in which the world works in this way where you as an individual are completely in power of everything that happens to you, and that everything is just about individual choice. And books like this, I've seen this sort of philosophy be used in a lot of different places, not just self-help books, but coaches, motivational coaches, and I understand that there is some usefulness to this idea, even if it's not completely accurate. But I think some people push this idea because they don't want to tell people something that they don't want to hear, which is that individuals are just not nearly as powerful as we sometimes like to think we are. Our lives constantly will depend on other people, sometimes people that we will never meet, circumstances that we can't really even fully understand sometimes. And I'm not going to deny that there's some degree in which your own free will influence your life, and some degree in which positive thinking or being optimistic can yield very positive results for you. But sometimes in order to improve aspects of your life, you have to admit that there's things that are just not going that well. I think people should always be wary and question anyone who tells you that they know the secret, or they know the truth, or they know how the world works exactly, like the truth about wealth, about happiness, about these things that people would pay money to understand and to get control on in their lives. So number 4 is the other thing that I told you that I was going to talk about. So number 4 is basically Midnight Sun and Life and Death, both of them. So being a child, like I said, being 10 or 11, I read the Twilight series, so the whole 4 books. And over time I realized that they weren't that great and everything. It's not like they've completely gone out of my mind. In fact, I rewatched fairly recently. I rewatched the first movie, and I watched the other ones for the first time as well, more or less recently. But I already know that I'm just not going to read new material from the series. I already know that I'm going to look at it in a way that is a bit too critical for me to even enjoy it. But let me say this. The only thing that will make me read another book in this installation is if Stephanie Meyer made a version where she actually gets with Jacob. But I feel like we were robbed of this character, you know? The way that this character was presented to us, especially in the last, the last two books, the second half of the series, was really disappointing. I didn't know what to call it the first time that I, read these novels and watched the movies or whatever. But now I realize that it was a terrible choice for the author to do this. And I'm not talking about the fact that he doesn't get the girl. I mean, that's fine, that's life, it happens. But the way that she almost seems to go out of her way to let us know that, oh, at first he was the nice guy, but now he's the asshole and everybody knows now the nice guy. And so, not to be over dramatic, but I think she owes it to us a version where Jacob does get with Bella, even if it's just one book, and I will read that book, okay? I will never read any other Twilight thing ever again. Will never give my money to her unless it is that kind of story. So, I mean, I love how I'm saying that as if she were to actually watch this video and even care about what I have to say. But you are watching this video, so the opinion is now out there in the world. Number 5 is anything, not the title of the book, but any book by Colleen Hoover. So over the last few days, I've been compiling some romance book titles that I was interested in reading and reviewing to make a video where I rank them all and try to find the best one, and eventually find a good or very good 4 or 5 star romance novel that I can recommend. And I noticed that she's a really popular author when it comes to romance. Not necessarily the top 1 or 2 were among the titles that I found, the list that I found, but she's fairly popular. It's raining, by the way, in case you hear that. I knew from the beginning that a lot of people just had a lot of issues with her writing, specifically how she writes characters, which again is my biggest problem generally with a book. Not my biggest problem necessarily, but if a book doesn't have good interesting characters, I feel like the whole thing is just kind of pointless, with some exceptions of books that I think are particularly interesting or experimental or are plot driven but are still really good, But with her, it just seems, I mean, from other reviews that I've seen, from a lot of summaries that I've seen, reviews on BookTube, on Goodreads, it seems that she's basically writing the same story over and over. Like, it's about a young woman or a girl with no personality who has some sort of trauma, has gone through something really dramatic. She finds a guy who sucks and is a terrible couple, partner, but it's okay because he's also gone through trauma, and there's probably gonna be some cheating involved, some abuse, most likely, which I guess is realistic or whatever, but depending on how you frame it and how you handle it, it can be really frustrating to read about, especially if you are expecting me to root for the character who is being abusive or who is cheating on the other. So in literary fiction, it's very common for characters, even the main ones, to not be necessarily good or be ones that you're supposed to like and totally root for unconditionally. And you're not supposed to take everything that they say at face value, or even everything that the narrator says at face value. But in a new adult or romance novel or something of the sort, you are supposed to root for the love between the two characters, right? And if one of them is a terrible person, it's going to be pretty difficult to do that. But what makes it more difficult is when the author is trying to justify it to the reader, even though it is something that is not that easy to forgive, if it's even forgivable. And for a more experienced reader, that actually tends to have the opposite effect. It makes us dislike that character that we're supposed to like even more, because we can tell that you're trying really hard to justify things, and make us like someone that has no reason to be liked. Especially if the story just makes no convincing arguments to show you that someone wasn't actually that wrong for doing something or what have you. So based on these patterns that I have seen and that I have read in reviews and seen on videos about her books, I think I will just steer clear out of them. I know that there's a lot of people who really love her in general, and or at least have a couple of books that they think are really good from her. So those are my picks for the books that I will most certainly never read. So I hope that this video was in some way enjoyable for you, and thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.